Welcome to The Debate. You know, when you look at an architectural blueprint, there is this profound sense of perfection. The lines are perfectly straight, the load-bearing calculations are mathematically sound, and the vision of the structure is just flawless.
Right, on paper, the building is invincible.
Exactly, on paper. But what happens when you take a flawless blueprint for a society and try to pour the concrete in the messy, unpredictable rain of the real world? I mean, the soil shifts, materials warp, builders misinterpret a line.
Suddenly, you aren't dealing with pure mathematics anymore. You are dealing with physics, nature, and human behavior.
Yes, and that collision really frames our central disagreement today. We are exploring a profoundly ambitious transition proposed in our shared material, the attempt to move a radical philosophical concept, an infallible society, out of the realm of pure imagination and into a physical, functioning human environment.
Which the project refers to simply as the island.
Right, the island. And it brings us to the core question of this discussion. Can a physical society be intentionally engineered to remain a perpetually self-correcting learning system that resists the natural corruption of power? Or do the inescapable realities of human biology, resource management, and the calcification of institutions make a truly self-correcting physical society impossible?
It's a massive leap to make, moving from theory to tangible dirt, steel, and human lives.
It really is. And I'll be arguing that the methodology we're examining, so the reliance on radical transparency, the intentional decentralization of the founder, and the reframing of systemic criticism as an act of construction, provides a highly credible, robust blueprint for shaping positive human behavior through environmental incentives.
And I'll be arguing that the project is acutely and perhaps fatally vulnerable to the human realities it is trying to engineer away. When you combined our evolutionary power dynamics with the inevitable calcification of physical institutions, translating this beautiful philosophy into a real-world island will inescapably reproduce the very hierarchies and fixed systems it seeks to escape.
Well, let's get right into it, because I think the immense strength of this project resides in its intellectual honesty. It explicitly refuses to promise a utopia.
Right, it doesn't promise paradise.
No, not at all. It frames the island purely as an observable experiment. It shifts from the theoretical question, could this work, to the empirical question, does it work? And let's ground this right away for anyone listening who might be picturing a cult of personality.
Oh, yeah, that's a common misconception.
Exactly. The structural defense against human fallibility here is that the idea must outgrow its creator. The framework intriguingly refers to this founder figure as the time traveler.
And we should probably clarify for everyone, that's not a sci-fi concept.
Right, no time machines here. It's just a metaphor for a founder who sets the wheels in motion for a future they ultimately won't and shouldn't control. Instead of operating on the traditional authoritarian mandate of, trust us, this entire system operates on the mandate, examine us.
Examine us, yeah.
The requirement is that the culture of the infallible society, so the demand for accountability, evidence, and questioning, that all must be established long before the first shovel hits the dirt.
Look, I hear that, but I come at it from a completely different way. I'm drawing directly on the project's own warnings. It freely admits that power has a strange effect on human beings. We see this historical cycle constantly, right?
Sure.
Good intentions lead to praise. Praise leads to blind trust. And eventually, a population just ceases to question its leaders. The philosophy sounds airtight on paper, but as soon as you move into physical reality, a reality requiring enormous capital resources, legitimate revenue cycles, and diverse experts like engineers, lawyers, and economists, power will naturally consolidate.
Because of the resources.
Exactly. People who control essential resources inevitably gain outsized influence.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how this exact vulnerability is addressed, starting with that time traveler concept. The premise is very clear. One person can start a question, they can write a book or imagine this twin-world alternative, but one person cannot create a civilization.
Okay.
The founder's greatest success is actually becoming irrelevant over time. If the idea disappears when the founder disappears, well, the project has failed. I look at this through the lens of open-source architecture.
Wait, like software development?
Yes, exactly like that. Think of the pioneers of the early internet or the Linux kernel. An architect designs the foundational protocols, but the community builds upon it, stress tests it, and ultimately owns the digital city. The structure survives the architect's absence because the audience isn't treated as passive followers.
They are participants.
Right. They are treated as capable investigators.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the open source analogy maps neatly onto human social structures in the physical world. Let me tell you why. In open source software, if you don't like the direction the project is going, you fork the code.
Right.
You copy it.
You copy it and start your own version.
But you cannot fork a physical island when you disagree with the mayor. You can't fork a hospital or a water treatment plant.
Okay, that's a fair distinction regarding physical infrastructure, but
Let me push this just a bit further because I am really questioning the psychological realism of this transition. Open source software doesn't require us to allocate physical food or adjudicate property disputes or construct tangible infrastructure where physical safety is on the line.
well, no, of course not.
And human biology and social conditioning have, for millennia, driven us to centralize authority when we face the harsh realities of physical survival. The framework demands intelligent criticism over blind loyalty, yes. But can a philosophical mandate truly override the evolutionary human instinct to seek a strong leader when things get physically difficult?
That's a really interesting point, though I would frame it differently. The project isn't asking people to simply override millions of years of biology through sheer willpower. That would be impossible.
Yeah, it would be.
What it is doing is fundamentally altering the environment that triggers those biological responses.
What does a different environment actually mean in practice, though?
It's very precise. It doesn't just mean prettier buildings or, renewable energy grids. It means changing the conditions under which decisions are made. Who has power? Who can challenge power? How are mistakes handled?
Okay.
If people are trained from the beginning to see disagreement not as hostility but as a necessary part of the construction process, the instinct to blindly follow a leader is interrupted by a new cultural norm. If a serious critic is viewed as someone protecting the project from its own mistakes rather than as an enemy of the state, well, you dismantle the psychological machinery of the personality cult.
But that assumes the culture of intelligent criticism can withstand the pressures of economic and physical necessity. Which brings us to the actual tangible resources required to build this island. We know this project relies on legitimate revenue, books, videos, educational content, to generate the resources to move from the digital space to physical reality.
Right.
And the proposed safeguard against the corrupting influence of all that capital is transparency.
Exactly. The financial journey is visible. Where did the money come from? What was built? What failed? Transparency here isn't just bookkeeping, it is the core philosophy.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the limits of transparency as a preventative tool? I mean, transparency is a lens. It is not a shield. Let's play this out. Let's look at a Tuesday on the island. The community includes agricultural experts, engineers, lawyers. The diversity is celebrated. But what happens when the agricultural system suffers a catastrophic blight?
Or a bad harvest, sure.
Or the power grid falters during a storm? The engineers and the resource managers become inherently more essential to the island's immediate physical survival than the philosophers, the content creators, or the critics.
And you're saying that imbalance inherently breaks the system.
I'm saying transparency will clearly show us that the engineers are consolidating power. It will allow us to watch the imbalance occur in real time. But does seeing the imbalance actually prevent it? If you're listening to this and thinking, knowing who holds the power doesn't strip them of it, if their skills are keeping me alive, well, you aren't alone. I argue transparency doesn't solve the problem. It just gives you a front row seat to the consolidation of power.
I'm not totally convinced by that line of reasoning because it treats transparency as a passive observation deck, like a security camera.
A security camera?
Yeah, a security camera just records the house burning down. But transparency in this framework is designed to act more like a circuit breaker. It is an active mechanism for accountability.
How does it actively break the circuit, though? If I'm the agricultural expert and I decide I need 80% of the island's water diverted to my sector, and I have the technical know-how to enforce it, how does a transparent ledger stop me?
Because the infrastructure itself, the physical and procedural design, prevents hoarding from yielding social power. If transparency reveals that one group is consolidating leverage, the project doesn't just watch it happen. The design explicitly mandates that if one group becomes more powerful, the structure must be examined again.
Examined by who, though?
By the community. And because the culture has decoupled disagreement from hostility, challenging the engineers isn't an act of treason, it's a necessary structural review. The mechanism of correction is that the community has been trained and possesses the literal structural mechanisms, whether that's decentralized resource allocation systems or distributed consensus models, to vote on or pivot the resource flow without waiting for the engineer's permission.
But you're assuming the engineers, who now hold the critical leverage of survival, will willingly submit to a structural review simply because the foundational philosophy asked them to. When human beings acquire leverage, they rarely surrender it voluntarily just because a transparent ledger shows they have it.
But
They'll argue, I need this water to save the crops. Your structural review is going to starve us all. And the community, out of sheer fear, will side with the engineer.
Which is exactly why the ultimate goal of the project, its most significant innovation, isn't a fixed system of governance. It is the creation of a learning system. The proposition here is that the real inheritance we want to give future generations isn't a finished, perfect society.
Because a finished, fixed system eventually encounters a problem it wasn't designed for.
Right, exactly. If it can't adapt, the problem grows and the society collapses. A learning system, however, preserves the ability to question. It teaches future generations that the system they inherit is not sacred. It's a tool. And if the tool is broken, even if an engineer says it's the only way, the community has the cultural and structural right to replace the tool.
And here is where the physical reality of the island becomes the greatest threat to your learning system. Let's ground this concept of calcification. It sounds like a dry sociology term.
How would you define it in this context?
Calcification means that once a group of people get used to a certain set of rules and they build homes and their kids are comfortable, they will fight tooth and nail to stop those rules from changing.
Even if they're broken.
Even if the rules are fundamentally broken for someone else. The project itself warns of this exact danger. It notes that once buildings, institutions, and traditions exist, people become attached to them. The new environment inevitably becomes the old environment.
I want to push back on you directly here. If we accept your premise that all physical institutions inevitably calcify, and that whoever holds the tools of survival will inevitably consolidate power, aren't we just surrendering to a completely deterministic view of human nature?
I don't think so, no.
But doesn't this specific framework, by explicitly giving children evidence, allowing them to challenge institutions, and teaching them from birth that their environment is not sacred, doesn't that actively interrupt the historical cycle of calcification?
I don't think acknowledging biological and sociological realities is deterministic. I think it's necessary for survival. When you move to the island, you are no longer dealing with theoretical citizens. You are dealing with real children. The material hits on this perfectly. The evidence becomes visible. Children either thrive or they don't.
And that visibility is a strength.
But think about the stakes. When a society is responsible for the physical thriving of children, the stakes are existential. Continuous, fluid experimentation, a learning system that constantly tears down and rebuilds its structures when it finds a flaw, is practically and morally fraught when lives are on the line. Parents inherently seek stability.
Well, sure.
They don't want a learning system if learning involves their kid being part of a failed agricultural experiment. They seek fixed systems to protect their young. The very act of living in a physical world breeds a necessary conservatism that will calcify your learning system.
That is a profound challenge. I really don't dismiss the biological reality of protective parents. But I argue the framework anticipates this by fundamentally redefining what stability actually means. You are equating stability with rigid, fixed structures.
Because historically, physical walls and unchanging laws provide safety.
But the text suggests, and I agree, that rigid structures are actually the most dangerous, because when they fail catastrophically. Real stability is adaptability. Let's go back to your example of the agricultural model failing.
Okay.
If crops are failing and children aren't thriving, a fixed system might try to suppress that information to maintain authority, or double down on a broken method because it's tradition. A learning system supported by radical transparency identifies the failure quickly, admits it openly, and adapts.
assuming the people in charge actually admit the failure.
But that's just it. The system is designed so that admitting failure is rewarded, not punished. That adaptability is what actually protects the children. The project doesn't ask people to abandon their protective instincts, it redirects those instincts. It says, if you want to protect your children, your best tool is intelligent criticism, not blind institutional loyalty.
I see the logic, but you must admit the transition from asking, could this work in the digital space, to does it work on the physical island, fundamentally changes the nature of the philosophy.
Oh, it absolutely does. And the project embraces that change. It acknowledges that once people are living there, purely philosophical answers vanish. You can't debate a power grid into functioning. People either cooperate or they don't. Resources either reach people or they don't. The physical evidence becomes the final judge of the philosophy.
Right. And that physical evidence will be incredibly messy. Imagine the friction of everyday life. Let's say someone on the island agrees with the education model, but fiercely disagrees with the economic model. In theory, that's fine. Nobody needs to accept the entire philosophy at once. Disagreement doesn't make someone an enemy.
Which is the core of decoupling disagreement from hostility.
Yes, and it is a beautiful sentiment for an intellectual forum. But when you are on the island and you have to decide exactly how to allocate a limited supply of building materials or antibiotics today at 2 p.m., you can't just philosophically agree to disagree.
A choice has to be made.
A decision must be made. Action must be taken. The necessity of physical action forces hierarchies to form. Someone has to make the final call, and over time, the people who make those calls become the new authority.
That is exactly why the culture of this society must begin right now, in the preparatory phase, long before the island even exists. If the project claims to value accountability and evidence, those things must be practiced in how it generates revenue, how it builds its community, and how it handles early criticism. You are right that decisions have to be made, but how they are made, how failures are handled, and how power is challenged is what constitutes the environment.
But my point is that the environment will always be subordinate to survival.
If the island were simply a collection of buildings with a utopian label slapped on it, you would be absolutely right. It would just be the old world with new architecture. It would calcify in a generation. But this is about fundamentally changing the psychological and institutional conditions of human interaction. We are changing what is scarce, what is transparent, and what is rewarded.
I appreciate the ambition of it. I really do. The idea of a society capable of improving itself, where the audience is not a group of passive followers but active investigators. It's intellectually thrilling. I truly mean that. But I cannot escape the conclusion that the physical and economic realities of building a civilization will inevitably exert crushing pressure on these ideals. While the philosophy beautifully acknowledges its own dangers, like the tendency toward personality cults and institutional rigidity, the very act of building the island guarantees that human tendencies toward power consolidation will eventually corrupt the learning system. You just can't out-engineer human nature when starvation or physical danger is on the table.
And I maintain that by treating citizens as serious critics from day one, and by fundamentally altering the environment that triggers those survival instincts, this project offers the most rigorous evidence-based path we have from imagination to collective action. It recognizes the flaws in human nature, but provides a structural, transparent method to build a self-correcting society anyway.
If there is one point of convergence between us today, I think it's drawn straight from the most profound insight in this entire exploration. Reality gets the final vote.
Indeed, the ultimate test of any philosophy is physical reality. The moment the project moves onto the island, the theoretical debates vanish. They are replaced by the unforgiving, highly visible evidence of whether systems actually function and whether human beings actually thrive.
It is the moment the experiment stops being just an idea and becomes a human society. And human societies, despite our best blueprints, are never simple.
Which is exactly why this transition is worth observing, not just as tourists, but as participants. It forces us to examine the deepest questions of our own nature and whether we are genuinely capable of consciously designing the environments that shape us.
There is vast territory remaining in this material regarding the specific mechanisms of this proposed society, and we've really only just scratched the surface today.
We definitely have more to explore.
But for now, we leave it to you, the listener, to ponder whether a pristine blueprint can ever truly govern the unpredictable shores of a physical island.